Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight to meet Taylor Jenkins Reid, author of Malibu Rising, Daisy Jones and the Six, and the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. My name is Jarrett Jessup. I am the board president for the Foundation for San Mateo County Libraries. So first, a quick overview of tonight's agenda. We'll start with an interview with Taylor. Then Taylor will do a reading from Malibu Rising. And finally, following Taylor's reading, we'll take questions from the audience. Your microphone and video will be turned off for this webinar. Please submit your questions in the Zoom Q&A found at the bottom of the screen. For those who'd like to access live closed captions for this event, click on the CC icon in your Zoom toolbar at the bottom of the Zoom page, then click on Show Subtitle. San Mateo County Libraries is excited to introduce Taylor Jenkins Reid, New York Times best-selling novelist and screenwriter. Her latest novel, Malibu Rising, follows four famous surfer siblings as they throw an epic party celebrating the end of the summer of 1983. Secrets will come to light, the Riva mansion will go up in flames, and their lives will change forever. Malibu Rising was the Today Show's June Read With Jenna book club pick and is in development by Hulu as a television series. Taylor writes and speaks passionately about relationships, love in all its complexity, women's issues, and the writing process. Welcome, Taylor.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be doing this tonight.
Yeah, really excited to have you. I have my copy of Malibu Rising right here. I just finished it last week, so really excited to get to talk to you about it. I'm truly honored.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for reading it.
Yeah, I got it from a bookstore, didn't quite get it from the library. But I have heard from the staff that we can't keep your book on the shelves, that the hold list is very long. So glad to see the success of Malibu Rising.
I want readers to be able to find it in the library, but it's really lovely to know that many people are showing up to read it.
Great. So starting out, historical fiction is an interesting subgenre, I think. And as I was reading through the book, obviously we have the Riva family, which is fictional, and at their epic party, we're hearing about very famous stars who are also fictional. But then there was also this interesting element about the woman from Flashdance and she being at the party. How do you decide when you're writing a novel about what is going to be fiction and what is going to be reality?
Yeah, well, part of what's fun about this series of books that I've been writing with Malibu Rising, with Daisy Jones and the Six, and with the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is that I get an opportunity to populate this world with fictional famous people. And so I get to I get to create imagery and icons. And part of what is helpful about making them seem real is to put them in a world with a couple of people that we already know. And so I'm really, I try to be very mindful of one particular thing. And not all authors do, and I don't think that all authors necessarily should. It's just the way that I do it, is if someone is a public figure, I try not to actually put them in my book in any definitive way where I'm claiming that they were at a party or they did a certain thing, because in my head it's like, well, they're real people, and I don't want to take their likeness and use it for my own for my own creative art, but I do like to use them very vaguely. So I'll say something like, oh, Goldie Hawn was at the grocery store in Malibu, which in the 80s, Goldie Hawn lived in Malibu. I'm going to assume at some point she went to a grocery store, so it doesn't seem too far-fetched. Or so I try to use any real-life celebrities in a gray area where it was rumored this person was somewhere, or I thought I saw this person, basically to just give everyone plausible deniability. However, when it came to writing this book and thinking about the celebrities that I wanted to put in it, I was researching, you know, what was one of the hottest movies, hottest soundtrack in 1983. And the answer to that is Flashdance. And I happened to know Jennifer Beals and was working with Jennifer on something. And I was talking to her on the phone and I was like, would you mind, and it's totally okay to say no, but would you mind if I put you at this party? And she was like, nope, that's totally fine. So because I had the opportunity to ask Jennifer Beals, I felt like it was okay to put her at the party. And Jennifer is just such a cool person and has been famous and in the public eye for such a long time. She's got such a great attitude about all of it. And I felt pretty confident. I was like, I think I'm gonna put Jennifer at this party sitting over in the corner reading a book.
And I thought it was interesting that you did kind of give her anonymity as well by only referring to her as the woman from Flashdance is here. So I thought that was really an interesting take. So I know with your previous novel, Daisy Jones and the Six, and this novel, Malibu Rising, that music plays a big role in your novels. And so can you talk a little bit about how music influences your writing, and how are you listening to 80s music as you were writing this novel, or what role does music play in your writing?
Yeah, it plays a huge role. And it's interesting because when I'm actually typing, when I'm doing the writing, I need dead silence. I will sometimes, if my family is too loud in the house, I'll have white noise going on. I need to hear only the crazy thoughts happening in my brain. But with my past three books, with The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Daisy Jones, and Malibu Rising, one of my main goals is to take the reader to a specific time and place. I don't just want to tell you a story. I want to take you somewhere. I want to transport you into this world. And one of the ways that that world comes to life for me is through music. So with Daisy Jones and the Six, it's really obvious. This is a rock band. I was doing a lot of research about rock bands. I was listening to a lot of music and then listening to it again and again and again to try to learn the elements of it and to try to be able to talk about it in a way that was convincing. But it stands true for Evelyn Hugo and Malibu Rising as well, because when so for instance, with Malibu Rising, I made, I think at some point, like a 6-hour playlist of all of the songs that would be playing at this party. You know, and I took into account who's the DJ at the time, because at one point in the story, the DJ switches, and so the music is going to switch. And what do you play in the early hours of the party versus what's happening at 4 a.m. And I really put like so much time and effort into this, because I wanted, when I was writing those scenes, to be able, even if I don't name check what the song is, to be able to put you in that space and really feel like you're there. And music is a really effective way for me to go there in my head, and then hopefully to bring you there with me.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I definitely was thinking as I was reading through this, what these characters, who their favorite bands would be. And at times I felt I was in a Duran Duran video. I definitely did get that vibe from this book, that it's just perfect.
Good.
So, so shifting gears a little bit, but obviously staying within the early 80s, when I was thinking about this book and thinking about classic 80s novels, I was thinking of Bret Easton Ellis and Less Than Zero. I'm curious what your influences were, how you helped prepare to write this book from a novel point of view, or from a reading standpoint and research standpoint. Can you expand a little bit on your research process and what influenced you to write the book?
Yeah. You know, yeah, I know we were saying before, you know, there are a lot of seminal 80s novels, especially, you know, LA based or New York based, you know, Bret Easton Ellis, Jay McInerney. And I had read those at some point in my life, but I was not looking to create another one of those. So what I wanted to do was write a novel that exists very much in the zeitgeist of now, talking about things that are going on now, but that lives in the 80s. And so for me, it was much more about researching surfing, which I knew nothing about, researching the 80s, the various elements at play, both culturally and politically and economically during that time. And also doing a lot of research about celebrity. And so I read a really great book called Barbarian Days by William Finnegan, which is, if anyone's really interested in surfing, and I don't think you have to be a surfer to find the book compelling. It's just this beautiful, sort of melodic, meditative memoir about William Finnegan's time as a surfer, learning, picking up a surfer board for the first time in Hawaii as a kid. And then, you know, he's going all around the world chasing waves. And it's just a really beautiful book. And that helped me to learn how to talk like a surfer a little bit. And then I read so many celebrity memoirs, 80s celebrities, you know, Brooke Shields, Rob Lowe, those were big ones. I eventually read Andre Agassi's book because there's a tennis player in the story. And I had a lot of fun, you know, pulling moments from our culture that we all kind of know about, but maybe haven't thought about in a little while, and trying to place a new lens on them. So for instance, you know, Nina is a supermodel, and she stars in an ad that she doesn't have a lot of control over the ad. She posed for it, but she doesn't know what they're going to write as the copy and what sort of life it's going to take on. But it starts to really invade her life. And I thought back to, you know, Brooke Shields being so young and having that that ad "Nothing Comes Between Me and My Calvins," which had a huge effect on the way that the world saw her for such a long time. So that was a really fun part of the process of writing this book, was just having a good reason to read a lot of celebrity biographies.
That's very interesting, and kind of sticking with the surfing, and both Daisy Jones and the Six and Malibu Rising, California seems to play a central character almost. And I know you grew up on the East Coast and you went to college on the East Coast. Can you describe why you decided to move to California? And did you move to California to become a writer?
I moved to California. I got here a week after my 21st birthday, and I have been here since. I just always knew that I wanted to come here, and it look, I mean, the myth of California has been enticing to me for a very long time, and that's why I'm writing about it. The sunshine and the beaches and the beautiful people and everybody's glamorous, or, you know, whatever myth, you know, the we're all coming here searching for gold. That has entranced me for a long time. But in a very practical way, what it was for me is that I wanted to work in Hollywood. And I knew that from the time I was a kid. You could ask me, you know, what are you going to do? And I'd be like, I don't know, but I'm going to Hollywood, you know? And even when I went to college, it wasn't, what are you going to study in college? It was, which college are you going to go to before you go to Los Angeles? That was kind of always the question within my family. So nobody was surprised when I moved 3,000 miles across the country and set up my life in California. What was surprising to me was that once I got here, you know, I had that moment, and I think they talk about it sometimes, like when people go to Paris for the first time and they start to feel a little bit depressed because they're like, wait, I'm in the most romantic city in the world. Why don't I feel more romantic? And it's like, well, you can't really outrun your problems. I got here and I was like, I know no one. I'm a, you know, broke college student. I'm living in this section of the city in this apartment that I can like barely afford, and it's just not a nice place. I didn't have a car, and I started to realize, you know, you have to build a life before. It's not just like you get to Los Angeles and the streets are paved with gold and somebody's handing you a movie deal. It doesn't work that way. So that was like a rough year for me in understanding, oh, California is a place just like anywhere else, and Los Angeles and like the mythological concept of Hollywood like aren't just going to solve all my problems. And so I got here and I put my head down and I got a job in Hollywood and I started working at what I wanted to do and started answering some questions for myself about what that would be. And it took me a few years. I worked in casting for a while, which I really loved. And eventually what I realized is that I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to be the one who was coming up with the story that was being told and the people that it was being told about. And once I figured that out, I was around 24 years old. I've been working in Hollywood for 3 years. That's when everything clicked for me. That's when I was like, this is where I was headed. This is what I was trying to do. And now I live in Los Angeles and write novels, and you don't have to live in Los Angeles to write novels. So I could go anywhere at this point, but you know, I met my husband and he's from here, and this is where I've decided to stay.
That's interesting stuff. So we only have time for one more quick question before we start the reading. And I recently read an article as part of my preparations that listed a lot of novels that you like to go to for certain situations or that drew you in and made you become a writer. One of the things I was surprised about with your Daisy Jones book is that it didn't mention your favorite rock biography. So I'll ask it now. What is your favorite rock biography?
I think the one that was the most influential for me was Bruce Springsteen's On the Run. And I talked about this a lot during my tour on Daisy Jones and the Six, but you know, I picked up that book and I was like, I guess I should read about Springsteen, whatever. Like I just didn't really, I didn't realize how much I loved him. And I remember so I'm like halfway through the book and like you get to the part with all the pictures and I was like, I remember just having this moment where I was like, wow, like Bruce Springsteen is so hot. And I said to my mother-in-law, like 2 days later, we were having brunch and I was like, did you have any idea how hot Bruce Springsteen was in the 80s? And she was like, where have you been? She was like, Bruce Springsteen's been hot for decades. I was just very late to this, but I love Bruce Springsteen now. I love his music. I think his story is so interesting. And I think what I still find myself thinking about years after reading it is just as an artist, he makes a really strong distinction at the top of his career that he's Bruce Springsteen. This is his show. This is his vision. These are his songs, and the E Street Band are along for the ride. But it's not everybody's in the E Street Band and he's the lead singer of it. This is Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. And he had that clarity of vision and that, you know, confidence, arrogance, whatever it is, to say, this is me, this is my vision, I am in charge of this. It's not a democracy. And I think that's part of the reason why all these years later, he's still around. There's no big band breakup because he's been very, very clear on the structure of that band. Anyone that's read Daisy Jones will know I took a lot of that and used it in the other way in order to create a lot of the tension that exists in Daisy Jones and the Six throughout their story.
And I mean, from a songwriter standpoint, his songwriting is such a story in itself. So obvious why. Yeah, exactly. Very obvious why you would be drawn to him. So I will pause there with my questions. And I know I'm going to turn it over to you right now to read a section of Malibu Rising. Thank you.
So this is, I normally only do like a small reading from the beginning of the book, but this is an opportunity to read a little bit longer of a chapter, and the book has had a little bit of time to come out. So I'm not going to read anything that's too much of a spoiler, but I wanted to read something that has a little bit more meat to it. So this is on page 77, and it's the story of Hud, who is the third kid in the Riva family. It's the story of him coming into the family in a sort of unexpected way. So this takes place in 1959 in the past storyline that is happening throughout the day. Let me catch my breath here. Okay. It was late December 1959, just a few days after Christmas. Mick was at the studio in Hollywood. June was home with Nina and Jay roasting a chicken. The house smelled like lemon and sage. She was wearing a red striped house dress and had curled the ends of her hair into a perfect bob as she did every day. She never let her husband come home to a woman with her hair out of place. Sometime after 4 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. June had no idea that in the 10 seconds it took for her to make her way from the kitchen to the entryway, she was experiencing her very last moment of naivete. With 4-month-old Jay in one arm and 17-month-old Nina clinging to her leg, June opened the door to see a woman she recognized as a young starlet named Carol Hudson. Carol was small, tiny really, with big eyes and fair skin and delicate bones. She was wearing a camel hair coat and pink lipstick, expertly applied to her thin lips. June looked at her and felt as if a hummingbird had shown up on the windowsill. Carol stood on June's doorstep holding a baby boy only a month or so younger than Jay. I cannot keep him, Carol said, with only the thinnest edge of regret. Carol handed the baby over to June, pushing him into June's already crowded arms. June was frozen still, trying to catch up. I'm sorry, but I cannot do this, Carol continued. Maybe if it was a girl, but a boy should be with his father. He should be with Mick. June felt the breath escape her chest. She gasped for air, making a barely audible yelp. His birth certificate, the woman said, ignoring June's reaction and pulling the paper out of her black pocketbook. Here. His name is Hudson Riva. She had named the child after herself, but would leave him all the same. Hudson, I'm sorry, Carol said, and then she turned and walked away. June watched the back of her, listened as the woman's black pumps clicked faintly on the pavement. Rage began to take hold in June's heart as she watched the woman run down the steps. She was not yet angry at Mick, though that would come, and not angry at the situation either, though that frustration would set in almost immediately. But at that moment in time, she felt a grave and seemingly never-ending amount of fury at Carol Hudson for knocking on her door and handing over a child without having the courage to say the words, I slept with your husband. Carol had treated the betrayal of June's marriage as an afterthought, the smallest piece of the puzzle. She did not seem to care that she was not only handing June a child, but also breaking her heart. June narrowed her eyes as she thought of the unique combination of audacity and spinelessness that this woman possessed. Carol Hudson was a bold one indeed. June continued to watch Carol walk away while the two baby boys in June's arms started crying in alternating tracks as if refusing to be in unison. Carol backed out of the drive. Her clearly brand new Ford Fairlane was crammed to the roof with suitcases and bags. If June had any doubt, the image of a packed car made it clear that this was not a game. This woman was leaving Los Angeles, leaving her son in June's arms, leaving him for June to raise. Her back was turned, quite literally, to her flesh and blood. June watched Carol drive off until the car disappeared behind the curve of the mountains. She kept looking a while longer, willing the woman to turn around, to change her mind. When the car did not reappear, June's heart sank. June shut the door with her foot and guided Nina to the television. She tuned it to a rerun of My Friend Flicka in the hope that Nina would sit there quietly and watch. Nina did exactly as she was told. Even before the age of 2, she knew how to read a room. June lay Jay down in his crib and let him cry as she unwrapped Hudson from his swaddle. Hudson was small and puny, with long limbs that he had not grown into, could not yet control. He was red and screaming, as if already angry. He knew he'd been abandoned, June was sure of it. He cried so hard and so loud for so long, so very, very long, that June thought she might lose her mind. His cry kept repeating over and over like an alarm that never ceased. Tears started falling down his newborn face. A boy without a mother. You have to stop, June whispered to him, desperate and aching. Sweet boy, you have to stop, you have to stop, you have to stop. Please, little baby, please, 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 for me. And for the first time since they began this peculiar and unwelcome journey, Hudson Riva looked June right in the eye, as if realizing suddenly that he wasn't alone. It was then, June holding the strange boy in her hands, staring at him, trying to process just what exactly was happening to them both, that she understood everything was far more simple than she was making it. This boy needed someone to love him, and she could do that. That would be a very easy thing for her to do. She pulled him close to her, as close as she could, as close as she'd held her own babies the day they were born. She held him tight, and she put her cheek to his head, and she could feel him start to calm. And then, even before he was silent, June had already made up her mind. "I will love you," June told him, and she did. Evening came around and June took the chicken out of the oven and steamed the broccoli and fed Nina dinner. She rocked the boys, gave Nina a bath, and put all three of them to bed, a process that took a full 2.5 hours. And as she performed each one of these tasks, June was forming her plan. "I will kill him," she thought as she washed Nina's hair. "I will kill him," she thought as she changed Jay's diaper. "I will kill him," she thought as she gave Hudson a bottle. "But first, I will lock him out of the goddamn house." When the kids were asleep, Nina in her bed and the two boys sharing a crib, June poured herself a shot of vodka and threw it back. Then she poured herself one more. Finally, she called the 24-hour locksmith out of the yellow pages. She did not want Mick to step one foot in their house, did not want him to ever again sleep in their king-size bed or brush his teeth in one of their master bathroom sinks. When the locksmith, a Mr. Dunbar, 60 years old in a black t-shirt and dungarees with yellowing blue eyes and wrinkles so deep you could lose your change in them, got there, June hit her first roadblock. "I can't change the locks without an agreement from the master of the house," Mr. Dunbar said. He frowned at June, as if she should know better. "Please," June said, "for my family." "Sorry, ma'am. Can't change the locks if the house isn't yours." "The house is mine," she said. "Well, not only yours," he said, and June guessed his own wife might have locked him out of the house a time or two. June continued to plead to no avail, but the truth was she was only a little surprised. She was a woman, after all, living in a world created by men, and she had long known that a certain type of man protects their own. They are faithful to no one, but surprisingly protective of each other. "Good luck to you, Mrs. Riva. I'm sure it will all work out," he said as he left, having done nothing but extort a fee for being dragged out of his bed. So June used the only tool she had at her disposal, a dining room chair. She lodged it underneath the knob of the front door and then sat on it, and for the first time in her life, she wished she were heavier. She wished she were broad and tall and stout, hefty and mighty. How silly of her to have worked so hard to stay trim and small this whole time. When Mick came home at 1 a.m. after recording, his collar undone, his eyes vaguely bloodshot, he found that the door would open a crack but budge no further. "June," he said, into the thin space between the door and the frame. "The thing that upsets me most," June said plainly, "is that I think I knew it already, that you weren't being faithful. But I put it out of my head because I trusted what you said more than I trusted myself." "Honey, what are you talking about?" "You have a third child," June said. "Your girlfriend dropped him off here with us. Apparently, she's not ready to be a mother." Mick remained silent, and June found herself desperate for him to say something. "Oh, Junie," he said finally. June could hear his voice give, as if he were about to cry. Mick fell to the floor, shaking his head and then burying it in his hands. Jesus, he thought, how did it come to this?
That is great, and I thank you for reading there. So right now we're going to start with the audience questions, and the reading was kind of a perfect segue into our first question from Michelle Rick, or Michelle and Rick, I'm not positive here. So Mick Riva was originally appeared in your book, Evelyn, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn. What compelled you to write about Mick and put him into this novel as an Easter egg character? And would you ever write another novel about one of Evelyn's husbands?
Yeah, so Mick Riva, as you were saying, is one of Evelyn Hugo's husbands. He's her third husband. And when I wrote that story, I really, really loved writing his chapter. I found him from the moment that I had created him in Evelyn's story. I found him to be the sort of character that I loved to hate. He drove me crazy, and I loved writing about him, and I liked the opportunity to see him in a lot of ways get his comeuppance. And so I just have a lot of affection for him, despite the fact that I don't like him. And so when I was writing Daisy Jones, there were a couple of moments where I realized that it was a really good opportunity to pull those two worlds together, to make it clear to readers that were paying at least close attention that Daisy Jones exists in the same universe as Evelyn Hugo. That, you know, you could be listening to a Daisy Jones and the Six song on the radio and drive past an Evelyn Hugo billboard. They're one and the same. And Mick Riva felt like a really good way to pull them together because I had this affection for him. And so Daisy Jones is at a party, is throwing a party at the Chateau Marmont, and there's a bunch of people there and it's getting out of control. And she's like, gosh, I think even Mick Riva was there. And so he's in a section of Daisy Jones causing some trouble. And so when it came time where I thought, well, what I want to do now is I want to write a story about a family, first and foremost. And I want to write about a family who has been left by the patriarch who you know, has not been able to rely on their mother for complicated reasons. So they have to raise themselves. So who are these siblings who have to raise themselves? And I wanted to add that extra element of, what if you're doing that and everybody thinks your life must be great because your dad's some famous person, so you must be so rich and you must have everything you want and everything should be so easy for you. And what if the difference between what everyone thought on the outside and what was actually going on the inside were just so vast? So I was like, okay, so I need a famous guy who would leave his kids. It's like, well, I know who it is. I know who would do that. And so it just really felt perfect for me because it was my opportunity where I've been writing this character now in 2 books. This is my chance to dive into who he is, why he is that way, and offer up an answer to, you know, Mick Riva goes through the world making a lot of messes and knowing that other people will clean them up. And so it offered me the opportunity to dive into the thing that excites me maybe most about Malibu Rising, which is answering the question of, when you have a man like that, who is cleaning up after him, and what is that life like? And that's where we get Nina Riva, who is the main character of Malibu Rising.
That's interesting. And so with Mick Riva appearing in all 3 books, is there one book that you enjoyed writing the most of the previous 3 novels?
You know, I loved them all. I will say they're very, very different experiences. Malibu Rising was some of the most fun I've had on a first draft, and then at the same time, one of the hardest books that I've had to work the hardest to get it into the shape that it was in. It was just more ambitious. I took on more than I realized. It took a lot out of me and made me a better writer. So I have a lot of affection for it. Daisy Jones was just such a totally different book than anything I'd written before in terms of the format of it being an oral history. And I'm still really proud of having done that, taking a format that's normally nonfiction and applying it to fiction. That was really fun. I will say writing The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo was what changed me as a writer. It made me realize that I could write things that were different than the things that I had been writing. It was a huge creative leap for me. And when I finished that book, I felt like I had put my whole heart and soul into it. There were so many things that I care about in the world that I put into that book. So many things. Just my heart is on the pages of that novel. And when I finished it, I thought, well, that might be it. I might have written the book that I'm supposed to write, and there might be nothing left in the chamber, and that's fine. And it felt like a very peaceful thing. I even remember going to a conference with booksellers, and the thing was like, okay, authors, get up here and talk about your book and why you wrote it. And I remember saying, I just love this book so much. It's exactly the book that I meant to write. And it's so rare that you have that. I just thought, I love it so much that I'm okay if no one else likes it. which was like not a feeling that you know I have that often as an author. So I have a lot of just a very soft place in my heart for the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo.
That's really interesting. And so Daisy Jones and the Six was obviously inspired by Fleetwood Mac. Who inspired you for this novel?
You know, no one in particular. The thing about the seven, I mean, really the thing about writing about famous people in general is there's always a, you know, it's always like easiest to be like, oh, well, this is about Fleetwood Mac, or this is about, like with the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, the assumption was it's about Liz Taylor. And I think, again, like we were saying at the top, I really don't want to take famous people's lives and stories and use them for my own benefit. So I really do, I love Fleetwood Mac and I love the vibe. And what I tried to do was write about the vibe without writing anything about them. And with Evelyn Hugo, I really wanted to take a little bit of Rita Hayworth and a little bit of Cary Grant and Tab Hunter. And I wanted to indulge that vibe without writing about them. So with Malibu Rising, I think it was, you know, like a little bit of the Frank Sinatra vibe in Mick Riva. And it was really wanting to tell a story of these siblings first and foremost, who, look, you can point to certain celebrity, children of celebrities, and see some resemblances here and there, but they feel the most sort of born out of organically from the story as opposed to a celebrity.
And so obviously all of these books taking place in Hollywood and the different eras of Hollywood. Do you have a favorite decade of Hollywood that you romanticize the most about?
Yeah, I think honestly, even though I've already written The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and it's about 60s Hollywood, I still find myself really curious about, like, is there another story to tell in 60s Hollywood? I'm really, really smitten with the 60s. And I think it was such an interesting time, you know, politically, socially, fashion wise. I'm just sort of, I think, very drawn to it. But to be honest, I think I'm a fan of the scenes that I'm writing about more than anything. So I'm really into 60s Hollywood. I'm really into 70s California, you know, the Southern California sound. And I really love 80s beach culture. So I want to spend time in all of these places. But the 60s still, I feel like maybe I need to go back there and do something else in that space because it's just really, really rich.
So I'm just feeding off of that.
Mhm.
Quentin Tarantino, obviously within the last year,
Yeah,
did Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which takes
yeah.
place in 1968. What did you
Mhm.
think of that movie?
I thought it was really, really interesting, and I have to say, um, until, and I won't give anything away, but until I got to the end of that movie, I didn't know what I thought about the movie. I had the end of it is what makes the movie beautiful. And look, anytime Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt are in a movie, it's great. They're two of my favorite actors. You know, Margot Robbie is such a talent. Margaret Qualley, like, she's gonna be huge. The cast was just incredible. Coming from a casting background, I'm obsessed with it. I really, really liked it. But I was until you get to the end, the questions in my mind were like, how exploitive is this? And then it turns out, you know, I felt quite good about it by the end.
Yeah, that's when it becomes Once Upon a Time. You know, I
Yeah, right.
definitely felt that's when the title comes in. So
Exactly.
really, really appreciate you diverging into non-related book talk
Yeah.
there.
I can always diverge.
Okay, so a question coming in from Candela and Martina. Who's your
Mhm.
favorite character that you've ever written?
It's really hard. I'm really, really proud of Nina Riva. I she is different than the women that I've written in the past couple of years. And so I really am very proud of her, and I feel a probably more kinship with her. There's probably more me in her than anybody else that I've written. Daisy Jones cracks me up. She's so far from myself. I mean, probably the furthest from me is Daisy Jones, but you know, I really do. I truly, with my whole heart, love Evelyn Hugo.
That's interesting. So a couple questions about kind of why Malibu and why Cliffside Drive. Was there any, like, you chose a specific address, and as part of this, I Googled it, and it is a house, or it appears to be the outside of a house. What was the rationale for choosing a specific house? Had you visited that house?
No, I've never been there, and I did not really mean to base it on that house in particular. What I did was assess based on Google Maps where this specific cliffside view that I wanted would probably be, and then just pulled a house number. So there's nothing about that house in particular, but I really wanted Nina to live on the end of a cliff and to live sort of at the end of the world in some capacity, for her to just be able to, you know, have civilization behind her and nature right in front of her in this very dramatic way. Cliffside Drive is like the perfect place to do that. And Point Dume is a really fun place to drive around if people ever come to Malibu. You get yourself a star map and just start driving around, and there's so many celebrities that live there, and it's such a quiet place. And then if you can grab a parking spot right at Point Dume, the little public park there, it is a view like none other.
Excellent. So expanding on Nina Riva being your favorite character, what is the writing process that you go about for creating a character? And do they come to you as you write, or are you planned out entirely before?
You know, it's sort of both. One of the things that has been really fun about what I'm doing right now in creating these fictional famous people is that I'm doing two things at once. I'm creating the person, who they really are, what they want, you know, what their wounds are, what they're running from, you know, whatever it is, and also their image, their public image as the world interacts with them. Who does the public think they are? And how invested are they in continuing that narrative for the public? So somebody like Evelyn Hugo is actively manipulating her public image in order to get what she wants, and purposefully making the gulf between who she really is and what people think she is as wide as possible. Whereas someone like Daisy Jones, I think, thinks that through this public image, through, you know, sharing herself with the world, she's going to find that people will love her for who she truly is. What I find refreshing about Nina, after having written Evelyn and Daisy, is that Nina's public image is of no interest to her, and she would love to shed it if she could. She is, unlike Evelyn and Daisy, who are actively pursuing fame and they want that spotlight on them, they want the attention. Nina doesn't. It was chosen for her. She is the daughter of a famous man, and the way that she's able to provide for her family is by being beautiful and having her photo taken. And so she assesses the situation and goes, okay, this is where I'm going to make the most money. This could really help us. I'm going to do that. She doesn't want to be famous. So somebody like Nina, for me, it was, then what does she want? And what is standing in her way of getting it? And that ultimately become, I mean, look, in many ways, that's the blueprint for every story. but in Nina's life in particular, she has a number of things that are stopping her from even admitting to herself what she wants. And taking her on that journey of forcing her to acknowledge what she wants and then seeing if she's capable of getting it for herself was really just a refreshing journey for me. I hadn't gone on and done that story before, and so I think Nina just feels very, very real to me because of that.
Thank you for that. So, getting a lot of questions about Daisy Jones and the Six.
Mhm.
Are there any updates on Daisy Jones' Amazon adaptation? And from a music standpoint, are you involved in the musical selection in any way? Could you describe a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, we were all set to go and shoot Daisy Jones. It was it was supposed to start shooting the first week of April 2020. So obviously that did not happen. COVID precautions and what have you. Um, it was stalled, but it is going to start production by the end of the year. We have our full cast. We've retained everybody, which is really, really difficult to do when you have a cast, that's as big as this one is, the whole band and the surrounding characters. Everybody has stayed on board. Everybody is ready to go. They've written incredible scripts. It is a fantastic set of episodes, and the music I have heard. I haven't heard all of it. I've heard some of it, and it is fantastic. It's being done at a studio up not too far from here called Sound City, which is in fact where,
Dave
um,
Grohl.
yeah, Dave Grohl owned it for a while. Sound City is the studio where Lindsey Buckingham met Mick Fleetwood for the first time. They were both playing in different, it was like Studio A and Studio B, and they linked up. And so it felt like, there was this band that I had loved so much that it made me want to write this book. And now, it's all come full circle because the fake Daisy Jones and the Six band is going to record here at Sound City. Music is great. It's very, very cool. I'm not involved in it. I'm not really involved very much in any of it. I just get to sit back and come to the parties and hang out and give my opinions and not really have to do anything, which is in Hollywood like about the sweetest gig you can get. So I'm just very smitten with the whole thing, and I think people are really, really going to love what the team has been doing.
Okay, that's very interesting and definitely looking forward to that movie. Also, getting a lot of questions about being a writer and becoming a writer. And I guess we'll start with, what is the typical timeline of writing a book for you personally?
It really depends. My first draft is always pretty succinct. So basically what I do is I come up with the idea, I get a sense of time and place. What are the things that I need to research in order to be the person who can write this book? Because in general, I'm picking things I know nothing about. Before I wrote Daisy Jones, I knew nothing about 70s rock. Before I wrote Malibu Rising, I knew nothing about surfing. So I have to make myself a temporary expert. So I take about 6 weeks of doing that. I watch movies, I read books, I find old magazines on eBay from the time period and start scouring those. And while I'm doing that, I'm starting to get ideas. Oh, here's like, oh, surfers tend to care about this. Maybe this can happen. Then, really, when I start my first draft, I know what the beginning is, and I know what the ending is, and I know maybe one or two things I'd like to happen in the middle, but not much else. And I set a word count for myself. This is how many words I need to write in order to have the first draft done by this day. And I just write that word count every day. And I'm finding out what happens at the same time a reader would be. Just day in and day out. Okay, what happens today? That moves me closer to that endpoint that I have already structured. At the end of that first draft period, I feel like I've like run a marathon and I am so tired, but really the work has like barely begun because my first drafts are so bad. They're just a series of ideas and things don't make sense and whatever. But once you get to the end of first draft, I always say, like now you know what your book's about. And so you can go back and start editing with the knowledge of what happens, who your characters are, what your book is actually about, and make it all come together. So it's about the second it's about the third or fourth draft where I show it to my husband. I get a series of notes from him. He's a screenwriter and a storyteller himself, so he really is my first opinion. Then it goes to my agent. Then it goes to my editor. You know, and it depends. Each book is different. How many drafts? Sometimes you'll get it's like, oh, 6 drafts and you're done. Other times it's like I'm on the 12th draft. You know, you never know. You have to feel it out for each book. But that first initial period of research and first draft tends to be the same with every book.
And from the writing standpoint, you're disciplined, you're writing every day, or are you experiencing writer's block and coming back and forth?
No, I mean, here's the thing about writer's block. It's not that I don't think it exists. I think that it does. But the shift that that I'm really committed to seeing everything through is that there's a difference between not being able to write and not being able to write anything good. And I think it's totally fine to write things that are bad. I don't think it's going to hurt anybody to just get out a bunch of stuff on paper that's bad. It gets you that much closer to eventually something that's good. You know, if you just stare at the blank page and go, oh, I can't write today, I don't think I have any good ideas today, then you're no closer. So I sit at the computer every day, Monday through Friday during that first draft period, and I get my words in, whether they're good or not. And look, there are times I go back my second, third draft and I'm seeing a paragraph and I'm like, where did this come from? This was terrible. I'm saying the same thing in 6 different ways. You know, this is trash. But by that point, I have a lot more information about where the story's going, what I want to do with it. It's not as intimidating. So it's not that I don't think writer's block exists. I think it's just I've given myself permission to be a bad writer. You know, my first draft, it's fine to be a bad writer. Nobody's going to know. Nobody's going to see it. So I have that sort of purity. If I thought someone was going to see it, I probably wouldn't be so brave about it, but I know no one will, so it's fine.
Thank you for that. And so do you, like as an aspiring writer, as someone who aspires to be a writer, do you have any advice for someone who's trying to write their first book?
Yeah, I think the absolute biggest thing you can do is not find an excuse for why you can't finish it. It doesn't have to be a good book. Me and my friend Ashley, who has started writing in the past couple of years, she just finished treatment today on a movie. And I was reading it and I was like, it's so good. You did such a good job. And we were talking it through and she was like, can I just tell you the euphoria that I feel of just having finished it? She's like, I don't even care if it's good right now. I'm just so proud of myself for having finished it. You don't have, what makes you a writer is writing the thing and getting it done. Worry later about whether you think it's good enough or whether you should show it to someone else or any of those things. Those problems come second. But once you have sat down and written a book, you have gone from beginning to end. You are already so far past most people who have an idea for a book but don't actually sit down to do it. There's 1,000 reasons to not finish your novel. But what separates, you know, the amateur from the professional is, can you just sit down and just finish it? You'll be so proud of yourself when you do. It always feels like, you know, the book that I'm finishing now is my 8th book, or my 9th technically, but I had another one that I was just fuddling around with in my early 20s. But it never gets less satisfying. Every time I get to the end of that first draft and I know that the draft is terrible, it's like with this last one on my end of my first draft, I walked downstairs and I just laid on my living room floor for just a solid 2 minutes, feeling like I've done it. That sense of pride, there's nothing like it.
And so interesting on your upcoming book, will there be any character crossover in the upcoming book, I assume?
You know, I don't know that there's necessarily character crossover. That remains to be seen, but it does fit in with these other 3. It is, I see my first 4 books were sort of a set. Contemporary stories, mostly love stories about women in their late 20s, early 30s. You know, this 4, Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Daisy Jones, Malibu Rising, and the next one those very much feel like a quartet, and very much on the themes of fame and women living in the public eye. So there's another one coming in this same vein. There's one more type of woman that I want to write about. And then, after that, I don't know. We'll go from there.
Okay, thank you for that. So I guess one final question back to Malibu Rising. How did you get the idea for the annual party in Malibu Rising? Is there an actual party that this references that you attended?
Not that I attended. I'm not nearly cool enough to be invited to a party like this, but a number of years ago, I want to say it was 2014 or 2015, I think, there was an article in the Daily Beast. And it was one of those articles, similar to like a Vanity Fair article where it's a reflection on something that happened a long time ago, telling the story of, a long lost story. And it was about this debutante ball in the Hamptons in 1963 that was thrown by a woman, I believe her name was Fernanda Wanamaker. She was the teenage girl who I think it was like the pre debutante ball was for. And sometime in the early evening, all the parents go home and they let the teenagers stay on this beach house in the Hamptons, and everything just grows wildly out of control. The chandelier is pulled out of the ceiling. They're swinging on the chandelier and it falls out. They throw the furniture out onto the beach. They break all the windows, and like all of these very, blue blood, upstanding young citizens were arrested or detained for their behavior. And it was this moral panic of, look what's happening to the teenagers, and I read that and I was like, oh, that's such a good idea for a book. A party that grows that out of control on the beach somewhere. Come on, it's just too good. But I wasn't sure what I was ever going to do with it. And then when I decided that I wanted to write about famous children, and specifically this surfing family, I was like, well, what if they're throwing a party? And then it just all came together. So if you want to look up that party, I think if you just Google like Daily Beast debutante ball 1963, I'm sure it'll pop up. It's a great article. It's just a lot of fun, just a lot of mayhem, and a great combination of how these are supposed to be, the future minds of America, and everyone's just shocked that they would get so out of control.
Well, thank you for reading for us and for answering so many of our questions tonight, Taylor. I did want to mention one more thing. I know that in reading for this that you mentioned that your favorite bookstore was Oxford Exchange in Tampa Bay, Florida. And I did want to let you know that if you are ever in the Bay Area, that the Half Moon Bay Library has just been renovated, and it's an absolutely beautiful space, and I would encourage you to visit it if you're ever in the Bay Area.
I love it. I will put that on my list. That sounds fantastic.
And while they may not have any tea or any snacks, it's all right there, and it's about 4 blocks from the ocean. So I know you'll appreciate that.
You cannot beat that.
Okay, I wanted to thank you for sharing your newest book for us, and thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. If you enjoyed this author event, please check out our future author events on smcl.org/events. We also appreciate if you could tell us how SMCL did with this program at smcl.org/rate this event. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.